I'm excited to get started with you. We're going to dive into what it's like to struggle with reading comprehension. We're going to develop some empathy for our students who are challenged by the text that we put in front of them. As Ryan explained, I'm the co-founder of the Right to Read project, but what I'm bringing to you today is PD that I did with the teachers at my school. I'm a literacy coach in West Contra Costa Unified School District, and we did this PD together, whole staff, and had some really meaty discussions. So I'm excited to be able to do the presentation again with you guys. I'm going to warn you, this is an interactive session. So if it's possible, please have your camera on. I understand if it's not, but if you can, please do. I would love for you to talk. So just keep your mute button on so that there's no background noise, but there's going to be plenty of opportunities. We'll ask a question and we're going to sit there in awkward silence while we wait for people to come off mute and chat. So please do. And then we are going to be in a series of breakout rooms for some activities. So if you're able to, please join your breakout room, engage in the activity, chat with each other, and then we'll debrief as a whole group. All right. One of the things that you need for the materials in breakout rooms are some handouts. They're in the form of Google Slides. So we're going to drop that link into the chat. I'm going to stop talking for a moment and allow you to open it up as soon as it gets there for you. And you only need one person in your breakout room to actually have the stuff. As long as there is one person who has the handout in your breakout room session, you're going to be just fine. So Carrie, can you put that link in the chat for them? Okay, as long as one person in your breakout room has the materials, you'll be fine. So I'm going to move on to get you into our first discussion. When you're in this room, you're going to talk for just 3 minutes. It's going to be a small group. You're going to introduce yourself. So your name, your role would be great. And then if you can think of one, share a time when you felt daunted by needing to read something. So I'll give you a moment to think. We'll open up breakout rooms in just about 30 seconds. You'll have 3 minutes there for quick introductions. And then also the opportunity to share a time when you felt daunted by needing to read something. Wonderful. As we're waiting for breakout rooms to close, take a moment to open up the chat, share a highlight from your conversation. Yes, Teresa, absolutely. When we're reading something we have little knowledge in, it's definitely difficult to comprehend. You're going to have that experience today, actually. I'm warning you. Here we go, getting into things. I love that Marielle is sharing that even as adults, we felt like reading was daunting. And that's a really important thing for us to realize, that it's not like we get to the end of comprehension difficulties. What happens is we encounter text that's unfamiliar and we have to figure out some ways to grapple with it. The ways we grapple with it may actually be helpful to our students. So you're going to go into a breakout room in just a moment, and you're going to do an activity that's going to challenge your reading skills. You need at least 2 people in your breakout room, and one person can be the observer, facilitator, helper if you've got 3 in your room. One person is going to share screen, so they need to have the handouts and they need to share screen. The second person is going to grab their phone or something that they can keep time with. They're going to need a 1-minute timer. And what's going to happen is partner 1 is going to read out loud from a passage for 1 minute. They're going to read at a natural pace with some expression. Well, the other people in the room are going to be calculating the number of words that they read correctly in 1 minute. So we're doing an oral reading fluency test. Then you're going to repeat this process for a second passage. You're going to discuss the experience if you've got time. So the 2 really important things to accomplish in your breakout rooms is read 2 passages, 1 minute each, and notice any differences in the number of words read correctly per minute by the one brave soul who does this. I'm going to show you the handouts. And as I'm thinking about things, Carrie and Ryan, I'm realizing we need to make sure that they can share screen under permissions. You got it? Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so the first passage is going to look like this. You're going to share screen. When the person with the timer is ready to go, they'll say, ready, begin, and you'll start reading from the first word in the passage. If you read quite a lot of words in that 1 minute, you may move on to the next slide. Then you're going to pause, take a moment to jot down the number of words that were read correctly in that 1 minute in the first passage. Then you're going to get another passage. You're going to read for 1 minute from this passage. It is the same reader. So we're not taking turns, same reader reading the second passage. If they read quite a lot, they'll move on to the second slide. And then you're going to jot down the number of words read correctly per minute. And you're going to compare the number read from the first passage to the second passage. And remember, it's the same reader reading 2 different passages. If you have time in your breakout rooms, there's some questions for you guys to discuss. So the person who's reading might talk about what they noticed. The person who's timing might talk about what they noticed in the calculations. All 3 people who are in the breakout room might talk about how this demonstrates how text difficulty affects reading rate or comprehension. Any questions before you guys head off into breakout rooms to do this task? All right, so in your handout, you've got your directions. I'm going to pull those up one more time. We're going to open up breakout rooms. You'll have 7 minutes in this breakout room. That will allow you 2 minutes for reading and some time to be able to manage the logistics and to talk about it a little bit. Carrie, I think we're good to go. Awesome. All right, everyone's streaming back in from their breakout rooms. Okay, wonderful. I can't wait to hear. If you read, so if you were partner 1, what did you notice about the passages? Feel free to come off of mute, open up the chat and type. What did you notice about them? It's okay to state the obvious.
I mean, I found that the topic of Alice in Wonderland was familiar. The story was familiar to me, but the order of the words and the way that they were said was confusing. So I definitely slowed down than maybe normal. On the second passage, I had good accuracy, but I didn't understand anything that I was reading. So that just, I'm a secondary literacy teacher, so that just rings so true. It's like our kids can decode. Teachers are sitting with 35 kids in a classroom. Teachers have no idea that they are not catching what they're reading. So
yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it sounds like with the first passage, with some self-monitoring, you were able to follow it. So you adjusted your pace in order to understand the phrases that were there. But with the second passage, we had quite a lot more struggle. I'm looking at the chat right now, and I'm seeing it had vocabulary that I was unfamiliar with. Anyone else want to chime in on the second passage? More technical language? Okay. I also noticed someone saying that the second passage, they read significantly more slowly. So if you were a listener, if you were either the person keeping time or an observer in the breakout room, what did you notice about how your partner read the 2 passages? What did they sound like? What were they doing? What student-like behaviors did you see? They took more pauses when reading the second passage. Yep, especially before some of those tricky words. Paused and self-corrected. Great, I'm glad your partner did that. So read more slowly. Yep. Did any of you have the experience of listening to somebody try to pretend like they were reading with fluency, where you're like, oh yeah, they're faking it, but they're like really shooting for expression? Yeah, so Tessa's saying more expression in the first passage, more genuine expression probably too. Okay, and then here's a question for discussion. How does reading rate indicate the level of difficulty posed by the passage? So what did you notice about the difference in reading rate with those 2 passages? Anyone want to share some numbers?
First passage, 190 words per minute. Second passage, 107.
Ooh, so almost 100 word difference there, it sounds like. Yep. 184 versus 100. Yep. So several people are saying that their partner read twice as slowly for the second passage. Yeah, that's been my experience too, as I've listened to people read that passage. So we're going to talk about this article. It comes from Stephen Graham, Teacher Efficacy in Writing, a construct validation with primary grade teachers. And if I were doing this with you in a room where we were together and could have the nervous giggles, what I would do is ask you, so what did you read? Tell me about what you read. And I would sit there and there would be crickets. Because the chances of you being able to retell that passage, paying attention to the important ideas, using your own words to summarize what you read, and having any sort of animated discussion about it, actually slim to none. So I'm not going to have us do that awkward pause, but if you do this PD with teachers at your school, I recommend that you do it and let the pause be long and awkward. We're going to revisit this passage, but now we're going to do it with some, having built some background knowledge prior to starting looking at small chunks of the passage. And we're going to start with some definitions. So the passage that we're looking at, passage 2, is about efficacy. And efficacy is how effective someone or something is, how well it works. And this passage is talking about teacher efficacy. And teacher efficacy is super important. It's the confidence that teachers have that they can perform the actions that are going to result in student learning. And it reliably predicts teacher practice and student outcomes. So how we spend our time and how well our students do as a result of our instruction. The passage is talking about exploratory factor analysis, which is a fancy way of saying it's a method of figuring out what of a few options makes a difference. And we're going to be talking about how big a difference certain factors make when we're talking about teacher efficacy. And there's going to be a section that's talking about a factor matrix. So I want to make sure you know what that looks like. A factor matrix is going to look at particular variables, factors, and it's going to find out if it has a positive or a negative impact. If it had a small impact or a larger impact. So we're going to be talking about the various factors and the impact that they had. I'm going to ask you to open up the chat. I'm going to reread paragraph 1 to you. And as soon as I get to the part where you hear who did what, you're going to type into the chat, and it's okay to interrupt me. So the second you hear me read the who and the did what in this passage, go ahead and type it in. Okay, chat ready? Here we go. To analyze the underlying factor structure of the 16-item teacher efficacy scale for writing, the responses of the participating primary grade teachers were analyzed through exploratory factor analysis. Initially, an unconstrained principal factor analysis was used to generate the factor matrix with squared multiple correlations as initial communality estimates. Items that exhibited factor structure loadings of 0.4 or greater were used to determine a factor. All right, so who is the subject of this paragraph and what did they do? Go ahead and type in the chat. Yes, okay, primary grade teachers, wonderful. Good thinking, Megan. So Megan was thinking primary grade teachers analyze the teacher efficacy scale. It's actually going to be the researchers who are analyzing the efficacy scale. What did the teachers do? Anyone else want to type into the chat? Primary grade teachers did what? Yes, they took the 16-item scale. So they took a survey. So primary grade teachers took a survey. Beautiful. We're starting to understand this passage already. There were 153 primary grade teachers, and they took a 3-part survey. The first part of the survey was about their personal and beliefs about their own efficacy, so their own teacher competence. And it was also about general teacher efficacy. So that's when we're talking about like, how effective do we think teachers can be in general? It's our perception of how the external influences, the things that are outside of our control, actually limit our teaching. So they answered questions about their own competence, and they also answered questions about how competent any teacher could be given the external influences that students experience at home, for example. They also took a writing orientation scale. So this is where they had to share their beliefs about writing instruction, the importance of correct writing. They had to share their beliefs about explicit instruction. And they also need to share their thoughts and feelings and beliefs about natural learning. And the third part of the survey that they took was the teacher writing scale. And this is just where they were saying how they spent their time. So they shared how much time they spent on the writing process, on students working together about writing, on the teaching of spelling or grammar or how to use the conventions in our written language. So we're going to do a poll right now. It's actually a few questions from the survey that teachers took. So we're going to deploy the poll now. I'm going to ask you to take it. And then if you finish early, look back up at the screen to make some predictions. Okay, so polls come in your way. It's 11 questions. Take your time answering them. If you finish early, look at the screen to make some predictions. We're going to take one more minute to give people time to finish the poll. Okay, I know you're curious about the answers, and I promise that you'll get a chance to see them, but it's not happening right now. So I'm going to click End Poll, and you will get a chance to see the results. And if you have a Post-it note that's near you where you wrote down your answers for more or less, high or low for those 3 questions, we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. Okay. So this is a $2 bill for you because the primary grade teachers who had to take this survey for Graham's study, they were given a $2 bill in the envelope with the questions. And that was just the good faith gesture to ask them to fill out the survey. Here's your $2 bill. Thank you for filling out the survey. Now I'm going to ask you to reread paragraph 2. I'll be quiet so you can do that. You're going to open up the chat and you're going to type how many items seem to impact efficacy. Go ahead and reread and answer the question in the chat. Yeah, okay, so thank you so much for taking the time to read that and also for typing into the chat. If you zeroed into this section, that 4 factors accounted for 60% of the variance, you got it, beautiful. We're gonna dive in a little bit more thoroughly into the next paragraph. Okay. In order to do that, you're going to need a text feature. So go ahead and skim paragraph 3. And when you're ready, type into the chat, what text feature do we need in order to discuss this paragraph? Yes, a table, and not the table that I'm sitting at right now, table 2 from the article, and it's in your handout. So you're going to need table 2 in order to be able to discuss it. Table 2 looks like this. And what it's got is 16 items that teachers were surveyed on. And we already found out that 4 of them were the ones that were most heavily loaded. You're going to look to find out which 4. You're looking for which one, so finding one, which item or statement was most influential in being able to help discern the teacher's personal efficacy, their belief and their ability to change, cause change in their students to help their kids learn. So you're going to be looking to find out which one was heavily weighted for personal efficacy and which one was most heavily weighted for general efficacy. And this part was a little confusing to me. So the general efficacy, this is the concerns that we have about our possibility of making impact for kids because of the external factors that sometimes we may feel outweigh our teaching best efforts. So in order to find the one for personal efficacy and the one for general efficacy, the limitations, you're going to be looking at the numbers that are recorded in bold. Anything that is at all close to 1 is very, very impactful. So you're going to look to find out which one is closest to 1 for each item. And you're going to do that in a conversation in your breakout room. You're going to talk about which factor was most heavily loaded for personal teacher efficacy and which was most heavily loaded or weighted for general efficacy. Those are our teaching limitations. And I really want you to think about, are you surprised? Why or why not? So we're going to open up those breakout rooms for your discussion. You'll have about 4 minutes in there before we close them. That will give you a 1-minute warning. So total of 5 minutes to chat with people. The table is in your handout. If you're having a hard time reading it in Google Slides, it's also linked there as a PDF in the notes for the slide as well. All right, we're going to open up those breakout rooms for you to look at table 2. Wonderful. I think we're all back now. I would love to hear what you guys discussed in your breakout rooms. What answers did you find, but also what discussion did you have? What came to light? Feel free to type in the chat, but also come off mute. Were you surprised? Not surprised? Go ahead, Julie.
I spoke in my group about my experience working in K through 8 Title I schools, and number 11, talking about home environment. That was really not very surprising to me, because a lot of our conversation in the elementary schools I work in do go back to the home and how it impacts children. And we spend a lot of time talking about that and trying to problem solve for these families and get them resources. And so that was not surprising to me.
Yeah. Tess, I'm super curious about what you typed in the chat. Can you come off mute and share a little bit more?
Yeah, we talked in our session that the top personal, and tell me if I'm getting this right, was that, or one of them was that I can, if I find the right strategy, I can make kids learn. And one of them was that the home environment has a huge impact on whether they learn to read. And those two seem to contradict each other. And so we kind of were commenting on that in our group.
Yeah, let's get into what feels a little bit like a contradiction. So when we look at the one that is most heavily loaded for personal efficacy, our own belief and our power to change student outcomes. When students' writing performance improves, it is usually because I found more effective teaching approaches. And then when we look at the one that talked about the limitations to our efficacy, a teacher is very limited in what he or she can achieve because a student's home environment is a large influence on his or her writing achievement. So can anyone chime in on what Tess was just sharing about how these two things seem to run in conflict with each other, or how you're making sense of them both being true at the same time?
Well, I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think like number 15, I think that teachers want to believe that the work they do makes an impact, and they want to believe that maybe strategies they've tried or risks they've taken in their learning are working.
Yeah. So it really focuses in on what's within our control, and it allows us to take credit for the student learning that's unfolding, especially if we're able to tightly link our teacher actions and then the student output. So we know what we did in order, what lever we pushed in order to get those outcomes. It's also true that the flip side can be the case, which is if we notice students struggle, being able to identify like, what is the thing that I need to do in order to be able to ameliorate this struggle? What's within my control to be able to help kids arrive at the destination I want them to? And then when we look at this other one, a teacher is very limited in what he or she can achieve because a student's home environment is a large influence on his or her writing achievement. That can really weigh down our ability to believe that we have the power to get the outcomes that we want. So it's not surprising that these two, like Tess was saying, seem to be in conflict with one another. We are going to feel limited in our personal efficacy if we focus on the variables that are outside of our control. Okay, we are going to get a chance to compare to our predictions, but before that, I want us to share the poll. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click share results. You should be able to see everyone's results to the poll that you took. And I'd love for you to scroll down, look at those 11 items, and type into the chat or come off mute anything you notice about us as a group. It's interesting. Where do you notice variation? Where do you notice some clustered scores? How do you make sense of them?
It seems like the correct writing questions are a little bit all over the place in terms of whether you correct spelling or correct grammar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's particularly interesting when we think about the people who took the survey originally were primary grade teachers. And the idea of what correct writing is when we're in the second trimester of kindergarten may be very different than the way that we see it when we're teaching 5th grade, for example. Other observations? Ooh, I like this one. Thanks for typing this in. Strong agreement on the importance of explicit instruction in writing. Why is it not surprising that all these teachers who come to the Oregon ORTIi conference are pretty much in alignment about the importance of explicit instruction? How do you make sense of that?
I'm assuming that folks here are mission focused, have read the research, know of these important pieces, and are here to help bring some of those strategies back.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add on? I'm also going to add on that it's possible that a lot of us have actually felt the impact of explicit instruction, to realize that when we're incredibly clear, leaving no room for doubt, and we're scaffolding students towards the outcome that we want, we start feeling more effective in our own instruction. And it's a cycle, self-reinforcing cycle. Any other observations about our survey?
I would be interested to hear somebody talk about their answer for number 4, because there's kind of a widespread of answers on that one.
Yeah, okay, so number 4, correct writing. Being able to label words according to grammatical functions, so like nouns and verbs, is useful in proficient writing. We've got about 30% or so out of 5, 6, 40% out of 4, and then about 26% below that. Pretty wide range there. Anyone want to come off mute and share why they said what they said, or what they think might be happening with our group's data?
I'll talk a little bit about just like in my own experience. So like my last 3 years in the classroom, I actually taught 8th grade writing. And I used a program called Fix It Grammar, which explicitly has students learn how to identify nouns, verbs, adjectives. And I think it was really helpful, but in like a larger context of syntax, of teaching, like, sentence structure of, here is your preposition, here's your object of your prepositions coming next, or here's your noun, here you have an article in front of it. So looking at it more than just like, here's a noun, here's a pronoun, here's an adjective, but looking at how sentences form and sentences go together, I think can be really powerful with writing. A lot of my students were MLL students, and so they didn't have English as their first language. And so explicitly learning English sentence structure was really beneficial for them in their own writing.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know if I answered your question.
You did. And I love that what you brought up is that it's for the purposes of writing. So if you're teaching explicitly what a noun is or what a verb is, it's how do those words function when we're talking and when we're writing. And I think some of us who rated that very low may have done so because we have a vision of worksheets that are disconnected from actual writing instruction, where kids are completing skills in isolation. And what's really important is for us to give them the opportunity to then see how it plays out in their writing and talking. And I'm looking at number 6, explicit instruction. It is important to teach children strategies for planning and revising. And that's where we want them to bring in their knowledge of grammar so that they're able to improve the quality of their writing. And we've got some pretty consistent data here. Most of us are doing value that very high. Any other observations in our survey data or questions you want to pose to the group based on it? Okay, we're going to now look, some of you who finished early when taking the survey had the opportunity to make some predictions based on these statements. So we're going to take a look at them. According to the study, teachers who place more or less emphasis on explicit instruction feel more positive about their personal teaching efficacy. Go ahead and type into the chat. Did you say more or less emphasis on explicit teaching makes us feel positive about our efficacy? Go for it. Yeah. And in no way am I surprised about this. So part of it is where we are at this particular conference. The other part of it is that I got to peek and look at your survey results. But even more than this is there's this cycle that happens where when we try teaching explicitly and we notice the gains that our students are getting, we get excited about that and feel really invested in the instruction that we're doing and in continuing to provide explicit instruction. That's very different than if we haven't had the experience providing explicit instruction and we think of it as like teacher talk, or we think of it as like the stand and deliver kind of instruction that would be not engaging for students. When you actually know what explicit instruction is and you do it, you have really strong feelings of efficacy. Okay, number 2. Teachers who place more or less emphasis on correctness feel more positive about their general teaching efficacy. Go ahead and type in the chat, more or less. Yeah, okay. Some consistency in these responses. So most people are saying less. Will you come off mute or add a little bit more? Why did you say less?
I'll go ahead and answer.
Go
I
for it.
said less because if you look for everything as right or wrong, then you're going to be happy 50% of the time and unhappy 50% of the time if you're going to judge by just the correctness, because really correctness is a continuum of correctness. And if you look for the good and where they're developing and then where that lagging skill is, then you're going to be more satisfied with what you're seeing in general.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And Anne, it sounds like, was mirroring your thought that it's a continuum. So she was saying it's not black and white. And if what you're looking for is progress, then you're not just going to say right or wrong, correct or incorrect. Instead, you're going to see where on this continuum the progress is occurring. And I love how Tess is saying, like, perhaps you aren't judging your effectiveness by correctness. Instead, you're looking at it in terms of student progress. Absolutely. And guess what? You were totally right. All right, last one. Students of teachers with high or low teacher efficacy spend more time writing. Okay. For those of you who typed in the chat, it's unanimous. I'm not sure if others have disagreeing ideas they didn't type in the chat. So let's hear a little bit. Why did you say high? Or what makes you think it might be low if you didn't get a chance to type in? There are so many factors here. So why would teachers with high efficacy have their students spend more time writing? So we spend more time doing the things that make us feel successful. Yep. Interesting, the connection between reading, speaking, writing, listening, and skill development. Rachel, are you able to add a little more onto that? I'd love to hear your voice if you can.
I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this correctly, but I meant that students that are kind of making that multisensory connection to writing as they're reading and speaking and listening and kind of keep hitting all those angles are going to perhaps be more successful in holding those skills, developing those skills.
Yeah. And teachers with high efficacy are likely to be able to see how the speaking and listening skills will develop and then become reflected in the writing. So then you want your kids to generate a lot of writing, so you're able to see that progress. Any other thoughts on this? Julie's reiterating that idea. That's important. I suspect that teachers with high teacher efficacy recognize the relationship between reading and writing. Yep. Any other thoughts on this one?
I think that teaching writing is really difficult, especially, I don't know, I can't say especially in elementary school because I haven't taught it in high school, but when you're just teaching young writers to write, it is a daunting process. And I think that it's really easy for people to walk away from it and give up on it.
Yeah, to avoid doing it. If you're like, oh, it's hard for them or it's hard for me, like I'm going to avoid this task that's feeling challenging. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm also going to throw another variable into this, which is that teachers who feel effective tend to have good classroom management. It is hard to feel effective if your class is feeling totally wild, right? And good classroom management is really essential for giving kids the time on task to be able to write. So we've got this spiral that happens where a teacher feels effective, is running the class well, we're able to devote the minutes for students to be able to generate writing. Then we're excited to be able to see their progress, and that cycle continues on. So you guys were totally right. Yes, teachers with high teacher efficacy spend more time writing. And then that totally pays off in student results, right? Because the more opportunities for practice students have, the more opportunities they are to be able to apply the things that they're learning in the rest of the school day. Love it. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the evidence of reading comprehension challenges. So I gave you guys that passage to read. It's that second passage. And I told you to read it for a minute, and you were such good sports. But I have a feeling that if I had asked you to just pull it out and read the entire study, I have it in front of me. I think it's about 20 something pages, that there would be a moment where you're like, maybe this isn't really the session that I want to be in, and you would have bailed on me. So part of it is when we're confronting really challenging texts, We may lack the motivation to read. Our students do this when they like need to get up and go to the bathroom, or they need to sharpen their pencil when it's time to actually do the reading. It's also reflected in a slow reading rate. And this is why it's really important for us to know what our students sound like when they're reading text that is comfortable for them and they're able to read it with high levels of accuracy and monitor their comprehension, and what it's like when they're getting a text that's really challenging for them. Kids who are skilled readers, who are more like us, may actually fake reading with expression, and you've got to listen really closely in there and be like, yeah, this is one of those moments when they're trying to make it sound like talking, but the comprehension isn't quite there. So slow reading rate is a really good indicator that a text is posing challenge. Not being able to explain the key concepts, big red flag. So if I had asked you guys to read that study and then said, so what did you read it about? What's it about? The chances of people being able to say primary grade teachers took a survey in order to be able to understand their beliefs about writing and how they approach their instruction, the chances of that happening, slim to none. What was likely to happen is we were going to just sit there with crickets. And if we were lucky, maybe somebody would start looking back at the passage and reading out some keywords or phrases, or like picking some keywords or phrases and trying to just like reread it to me as a retell. So those unclear summaries, big red flag for difficulties with comprehension. And I think a lot of times what will happen is if we read an unclear summary or we listen to one, we want to give the benefit of the doubt, and we want to say, like, maybe it was just a writing challenge, or maybe in that moment it was hard for the kid to find the language to be able to summarize what they were reading. But the truth of the matter is, if you really understand something, you're able to generate the language because you can use your own words to be able to describe what you read. So those unclear summaries really do give us a big indicator of how challenging a text is for students. Another thing that will happen is this inability to zero in on important parts. Well, they'll tell us about something that happened in the passage or something that they gleaned from it. And you're like, yeah, but that wasn't a key idea. And if we start noticing that there's that difficulty zeroing in on important parts, we want to make sure to guide students to those sections. The next part, the tendency to pull out words or phrases rather than using your own language, huge red flag. So if you guys started talking to me about the 16-item teacher efficacy scale and the factor analysis, and like if you started doing that, I'd be like, all right, either you are a researcher who is here and you've got a huge amount of background knowledge, I'm going to tune in and listen for that, or you're just trying to make up some answers that you think might be right. It's really important for us to be able to listen to kids generate their own language when talking about the text. So let's think about the instruction that we can do to develop comprehension when we're noticing the signs of this struggle. So we're going to talk about the evidence of reading difficulty, and then what we can do in our lesson planning and in our implementation to support students. So if kids are having a lack of desire to read something that we need them to read, connecting the text to something that they care about goes a long way. Providing guiding questions to give reasons to reread. So you're going on a treasure hunt to try to find the answer to this question helps a lot. And then breaking the text into smaller chunks so that it's less daunting goes a long way. And so I'm going to pause for a moment and give you a chance to think in our interactive session today. Did you guys notice us talking about something that we care about? Looking for thumbs, or you can type into the chat. Yeah, so it was interesting to me, like we like talking about teacher efficacy. We like talking about teachers and what teachers think and do. But you may not have actually even noticed the first time you read the passage that it was about teachers. Providing questions to give us reasons to reread. I did do that where I'd give us a paragraph and be like, reread this paragraph to find this answer. Slow reading rate. We didn't get a chance to address this that much in our 1-hour session today, but I did try to provide a fluent model for reading the passage. And had we had more time, it would have been really great for us to engage in some echo reading, choral reading, paired reading, opportunities to reread the text multiple times. And one of the things that happens when we do these repeated readings with students is we'll hear the first time and we're like, maybe some words were tricky, maybe the expression wasn't quite there where we wanted it, but we're like listening the first time. And then as we listen to repeated readings, we start noticing that kids are becoming more animated. They're performing it more as if it were something that they want to engage their listener in. And we start noticing, as a reflection of improved accuracy and familiarity with the text, the reading rate goes up. So we never want to encourage kids like, read it faster, go faster. What we want is the reading rate to naturally improve because students are getting the opportunities for repeated reading, and they're getting those opportunities to read accurately from a text multiple times. When we're dealing with kids' inability to explain key concepts, it's really important for us to make sure that we're providing definitions for the key terminology in the text. And if we had had some more time, what I would have wanted to do is display the passage that you guys were reading and have us turn sections of text into kid or adult teacher-friendly language and record those definitions directly above the passages where we're finding it. So if we could include a definition for the factor analysis, how much a factor matters, for example, or how much a variable matters. We can put those words directly and above them in the text. And we can go through and do a reread where we're paying attention to the definitions that we've provided, making sure that each small chunk of text is making sense. Making sense of those small text chunks by paraphrasing, super important. So for every paragraph, we want kids to be able to say the who and the what. And if we can push for the why is that important, even better. So we want kids to be able to identify the subject, why it matters in the passage, and to be able to retell paragraphs of text. And then we have the hope of being able to go back and retell the important ideas from the whole text. Those unclear summaries, we've all seen them, we've all read them. Maybe some of us have generated them on occasion. This is where those gists are really going to come in handy. So making sure that we're able to say a gist for a paragraph before attempting the whole piece will allow us to be able to have the text evolve. If students are having the inability to zero in on important parts, we can just help them do that. So we can guide them to go back into the text to locate and mark the key points that are there to make sure that they've got it before they continue on with the conversation. And if we're noticing that what they're doing is pulling out words and phrases from the passage instead of using their own language, that's why those opportunities for partner conversation, the oral rehearsal, is really helpful, because it gives you the chance to struggle with your own language first, get the opportunity to be able to put what your ideas are into your own language, and then bring them together to the whole group. So if you felt like this activity was useful to you, I want to encourage you to actually do it with the teachers at your school or the colleagues that you work with. And so all of the things are linked in the blog that I wrote about this PD. So if you want the actual full study from Graham, you're interested in reading it, you're welcome to pull it up. It's also there as an oral reading fluency passage. So you could have people mark the words read correctly. The other passage is there linked as well. And then also you'll see student-friendly or adult-friendly definitions for some of the key terms in the passage. So you could go through the activity of writing in those definitions above where they appear in the text and doing repeated reads to make sure that it's making sense. So I really want to encourage you to dive into this a little more if you've got the opportunity to do so. We are right at time. That was kind of amazing. You've got just about a minute to go ahead and pull up the feedback form to fill it out. You're welcome to pull out the resources if you want to have them on hand to do this activity. And once you're done with those, I've also got a minute or two to answer any questions that you might have. And Carrie and Ryan, if there's anything you want to say in closing too, we're perfectly spot on time.
We have a couple links in the chat, one for the feedback form for Oregon ORTIi, and then we've shared the link from Margaret to the Right to Read project. There's also a link to the materials in the program from today. So if you go to our symposium program, underneath Margaret's picture, there's a link to the resources for you in the drive.
Awesome. And in that folder, I did not put the slides for this session because they were spoilers in there, but I will put them in as a PDF. So if you're interested in the slides, they will be there now that you have experienced all the spoilers that there were to be. So you'll find those there in that folder.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Margaret before we close?
Oh, go ahead, Rachel. I just saw you come off mute.
Oh, I was just going to ask, lately I've just been reading so much about, encouraging students to get the gist of each paragraph and whatnot. And there are just so many different resources and graphic organizers. And of course you can just use it, I was just wondering if you have a go-to kind of quickie written exercise when you're asking kids to get the gist of something.
Yeah, great question. So it's funny because I had literally just made some photocopies here. I'm going to turn off my virtual background so that you can see it. So I had just made some copies for one of the teachers at my school. She's a second grade teacher. And so what she is doing is having the students record the who, the did what, when, and where. And then we're working on adding in the why and what made that important. And then after they fill that in with words or pictures, writing the gist down on the lines below. So it's an opportunity to plan what they write before actually writing. We also have versions for like our kindergarten teachers do it just with pictures, and they do it up as a big anchor chart, or kids may add on their post-it answers. Our upper grade one looks a little bit different. So our upper grade one does allow them the opportunity to plan, but then they're using these as exit tickets after each text that the students have the opportunity to read.
Nice. Yeah, that's.
Oh, it was like I just planted you in there because I had this next to my next to me. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for that. It reminds me of some of the writing revolution kind of, who did what when type responses as well.
That's not dissimilar from that. And it really is that planning of ideas that makes the big difference in the final output. Totally. Awesome.
Thank you so much. This is an excellent session.
You're so welcome. Oh, and now we're a minute over time. Okay, so I'll be quiet and say goodbye to you guys. It was so wonderful to see you. Take care.